Hello everyone, in today's video, I'll show you how to create this adorable mouse riding a sunflower in Procreate. We'll paint together and I'll guide you by sharing my favorite techniques to bring this adorable moment to life. Whether you're just starting out your artistic journey or already an advanced skilled artist, these tips will take your work to the next level. So take a moment to cozy up, grab your blanket, pour yourself a drink, and let's get started. All the brushes and the canvases I'm using will be found in the description below. You can also download the free sketch and the color palettes there as well. For today's demonstration, I'll be using the rough groove texture canvas, but you can use any canvas you like. And as you can see, I already imported the sketch here, which is going to be underneath the watercolor texture canvas effect. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to drag it underneath the sketch so we can see the sketch on the top. I have laid out the color palettes in order so you can follow along easily. So we'll start off with using this bronze tone color, using the wet on dry brush with 100% opacity and 100% size. So we'll start from the mouse and then the sunflower and the small details as we go along. So we'll start from the outer end of the mouse and use mid-tone and light tones as we go into the center of the mouse. So starting from the top, we'll work from our ears to the back of the body. I always like to use the sketches as a guideline as we slowly move in to paint in the center and around the ears like this. Now we're going to put some mid-tone colors. So back to the layers tab, we're going to create a new layer and pick this lighter tangerine tone color. And just follow along like this. Don't worry about painting around the legs or the eyes like this, as we can go erase them later on. It's whatever you feel comfortable doing. You can go around them, or you can go erase them later on. And that's the beauty with working with digital art. You can always erase certain parts, less stress, and more creativity. And when you can go around it, you could always do it at the same time as what I'm doing in the left side of the face here. Going around the legs and the eye on the left side. And now we're going to create a light tone color. So we're going to create a new layer. And we're going to zoom in a little bit and fill in the mouth area and the little belly, as well as the arm. And if you are enjoying these tutorials, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, you'll be notified when new videos are released. Now we're going to paint the ears, so we're going to create a new layer and pick this light pink tone color, and we're going to fill in the ears, the feet, and the hands, and the nose that we're going to do with the same tone color. And no need to stress or aim for perfection here. Once we add the colors, we can add the line work later on, which will bring everything together. And we can just paint over the feet for now, as we can erase the colors to make it more singular tone later on. And we're going to use the same tone color for the little tail that we have. Now I'm going to add a mid-tone color, so we're going to create a new layer and pick a darker tone of that pink, and we're going to paint underneath the tail like this, adding some more texture look. And also with the feet, as it's going to be looking downwards to the floor, creating a little bit more depth in the feet. Also with the hands. And the nose. And then the ears, focusing on the center as it fades to a lighter tone, reaching the light. Now this is the rough work we have, so open the Layers tab, and now we're going to erase some of the parts, but we're going to combine the layers. Using our two fingers, pinch them together. Select that layer of the brown tone color. Eraser tool, using the fine line brush, zoom in a little bit, and clean out the eye here like this. And also the little feet that we painted over. And now we're going to use the moving blender, and we'll begin blending the two tone colors at a time. So the dark to mid, wiggling around just like this. All the way to the bottom. And then the light to the mid-tones, just like this. Mixing only two-tone colors reduces the chances of over-smudging the area and having more control over the tone colors. Now select that tone color for the pink, and we're going to mix the two tone colors like this. And don't overthink this process. Just go wiggling around, going in one direction. Reducing the size in smaller parts like this, about 5%, going one down direction or upward direction. And moving on to the tail like this. Now before we move on, I want to paint the eyes. So we're going to create a new layer and pick a black tone color. Use the fine line brush, but we're going to reduce the opacity to around 65% and our size to around 50%. By keeping it a little bit reduced opacity, we're having a bit of a transparency look and add the darker tones later on. Just like this, leaving a small circle with a light reflection. Giving it a realistic, but also a little cartoonish style look. Same thing with the left eye, leaving a small circle, working with the sketch here. And we can increase the opacity here and put some darker tone colors in the center, more of the upwards of the area here, like this, giving a bit more character and texture. Now we're going to paint the sunflower, so we're going to create a new layer and pick this bright yellow tone. Use the wet on dry brush again, and starting from one direction, we're going to go all the way around painting the petals like this. And the wet on dry brush is perfect for this because it will create a natural watercolor stain look, hard edges. At the same time, it's nice tapered off. So if you want more pressure in the center to increase the size, we can put more pressure in there. But as we go into the tipper ends of the petals, we reduce the pressure, which will have a more finer effect. Probably one of my favorite brushes that I like to use with most of my artwork that I make. I like to do it in one sweeping motion for each petal, but you can add more textures and blend the colors later on when you overlap them too much. And if you want more precision, you can zoom in a little bit more to have a better effect of controlling your brushes. With experience and trial and error, you will begin to realize the pressure sensitivity that you will require for each settings of the area that you want to paint. No one begins as a professional, and that's just the beauty of learning. Everything takes time, trial and error, and practice. Because no one expects you to be a master right away. We're going to pick this tangerine darker tone color, create a new layer, and we're going to add, reducing the opacity to around 50%, and working from the center outwards to the petals to add some more texture and character into the sunflower. This will create a natural depth from the center of the sunflower, Every time I see a sunflower, it makes me smile, and it feels like it's smiling back. So adding more depth adds life into this. It turns flat shapes into something feel that is real, emotional, and a little bit more complete. And then from there, we're going to use the regular blender and press out slightly some of the tone colors to make it a bit more natural looking. And now we're going to create a new layer and pick the slightly darker tangerine tone color that we created before. And again, go back to using the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity to around 65 to 70%. And we're just going to add a bit more texture, some darkness, more depth from the center. And just work our way around from the center like this. Now we're going to pick the rough wash brush from our liner wash watercolor brush set and pick this dark brown tone color. We're going to create a new layer and paint the center of the sunflower like this. Painting around the edges to be a bit more precise and then filling in the center later on. And from there, we're going to paint around the edges again, just like this, all the way around and also on the center. Now using Fast Blender and working around like this. The center of the sunflower will look deeper because of how the seeds are tightly packed in the spiral pattern. And that's what we're creating here. Now we're going to create a new layer and pick this orange tone color that we have. And use the soft blush. And around 6%, and we're going to paint around the edges like this. And also using a yellow tone to give a nice reflection from the sunflower petals. This will create more depth, a natural sense of texture around it, allowing your eyes to be pulled inwards. Now go back to using the dark brown tone color that we have, and use the fine line brush again, keeping the size to around 60% and opacity to around 55%. And we're just going to create some seeds coming out from the center like this. Increasing the opacity to around 65% to paint the center, adding a little bit more texture in the center like this. Now continuing on with the fine line brush, we're going to pick this mid-tone orange tone color that we had before, using the fine line brush again, keeping the opacity to around 60% and size to around 45%. And as you can see, these sketches I made coming out from the center of the petals to add more texture like this. We don't want to overwhelm the sunflower petals with detail, but enough to give an idea of how a sunflower feels and looks like. I love this simplistic look with the realistic watercolor style. As much as I love creating art and painting sunflowers, I enjoy other activities, so I like to keep things simple, do a drawing within 30 minutes to an hour, and that's it. When the artwork is done, it's done. Don't overdo it, overthink it, just leave it. Walk away from it. Now I want to paint the stem of the sunflower, so we're going to create a new layer from here and pick this light green tone that we have and use the wet on dry brush again, keeping the opacity 100% and 100% size, and just following along the sketch like this. Painting all along the lines like this. And the leaf, just like this, having a little bit more of a texture on the edges like this. just how sunflower leaves look like. Now we're going to add a mid-tone color, so we're going to create a new layer and pick a darker tone green here. And keep the opacity to around 75% and focusing on the bottom piece like this, where the hand underneath the sunflower is covering some of the light tones on the top, and also some of the leaves to give it a bit more texture, like this. And now we're going to create a new layer and pick this dark brown tone color, and we're going to create some watercolor stain looks. Using the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity to around 40% and working on the edges of the darker corners that we did before, just like this. Working around the cheeks, a little bit of the forehead, along the under the arms, and the back. And I almost forgot to paint in the other side of the arm with a darker brown tone color, so we're going to do that. So we're going to pick that tone color with this dark brown tone and fill in the center where the other arm will be showing. Now we're going to create a new layer and we're going to add another tone color that's a bit lighter from the tone that we used before, keeping the opacity to around 30%. Use the wet on dry brush again, and this will give a nice watercolor stain look, but with the reduced opacity. And we're going to paint around the nose, leaving the mouth area a little bit lighter tone, just like this. Almost like when we were putting the mid-tone colors. But just with the wet on dry brush with the reduced opacity, will bring that water stain look with the harder edges. And again, we're going to create a new layer and pick that dark tone color of the brown. Use the wet on dry brush again, around 50%, and focusing on the darkest areas of the edges here like this. Like the ears, creating more depth, but also producing that watercolor stain look again. Especially when the shoulders and the cheeks are going to be a little bit more darker. As well as the inside of the leg that's showing a little bit. Now use that darker pink tone color that we had, and keeping the opacity to around 50%. We're going to create that watercolor stain looks. Same thing with the ears, the feet, like this, and a little bit of that tail. Using the opacity to around 35 to 40%. Again, we're going to pick this orange tone color in the mid-tone colors and drawing in some of that lines that we had with the petals, like this. All the way to the edge as we smooth it out a little bit. Now we're going to add some more finer details. Pick this dark tone color of the brown and fine line brush, keeping the opacity to around 35% and size to around 30%. So without adding too many fur details, we're just gonna go creating slight differences like this, flaring it out as we go around the mouse. This creates texture without overwhelming the piece, and it gives the impression of a fur while keeping things light and stylized instead of overly detailed. We're going to paint the whiskers by keeping the opacity to around 70% and the size to around 10% by starting from the center, following along the sketch and flaring them out outwards. Just like this. Now we're going to create a new layer and pick this black tone color, and we'll begin to create the line work on the outside of the artwork that we have. So use a marker brush, keeping the size to around 7%, and we start from the ears and creating some lines just like this. I like to give it a little bit more character by adding some flares, skipping the lines, flaring them out where their fur is, skipping some of the lines, just like this. This is a very fun style that I like to do, where I keep things light, fun, and not really striving for perfection here. It's the best of the both worlds, using crisp ink lines to meet the loose watercolor and the contrast that makes everything pop even more. And just like the small details that we can add with the nose, just like this, adding some little dots in the center of the noses like this, and making a cute little mouth here, as it enjoys floating with the sunflower. As you can see, I like to leave dots, flare outs like this, just more forgiving to use, where you sketch freely, paint loosely, and somehow it all comes together at the end. You don't have to add the line details, but I highly recommend trying it out if you haven't done so, and how easy and fun it can be with just small little details like this. Puts everything together. Drawing the little feet like this, adding so much character and just putting those two dots like this. And the tail. I'm going to do the same thing with the fur to give that impression that there is fur with different textures, but don't want to overwhelm it because we already have the fine line details. And as simple as we were doing before with the mouse, we're going to do the same thing with the stems, working around the lines like this. Give a little bit of squiggle, some broken lines. Just make it fun, easy, and carefree. Now moving on to the sunflower petals. As simple as it is, we do the same thing with the wiggles, broken lines, keeping things loose, and don't overthink about staying within the lines. Just like this mouse floating with the sunflower, carefree, that's what we're going for. Let the flow of art come through you with carefree easiness. And we're going to add some of those small details from the petals to give it more depth. And now we're going to add some light reflections. So we're going to create a new layer. On the top of the layers that we have, use a white tone color. And we're going to use the gouache brush, keeping the opacity to around 40% and around 30% size. painting some of the light reflections from the top of the petals, and a little bit of the light reflections coming from the seeds on the side. And to add more character, we're going to reduce the size of the gouache brush to around 60% and put a slight light reflection underneath the pupils like this. This will give a nice, beautiful, sparkling mouse eyes. And now we're going to go into the most bottom layer and we're going to create a new layer, drag that layer to the most bottom, and pick this blue tone color of the shadow that we're going to make. And we're going to use the wet on dry brush again, keeping the opacity to around 30%, and we're going to create a nice shadow underneath, as if it's floating just above the ground. And we're going to put a second tone color on top of that layer that we have to create a more depth look. And there you have it, a beautiful moment where a mouse is floating with the sunflower. I hope you had a wonderful time painting with me. And if you enjoyed these tutorials and want to continue on, I have tons of other videos. So click on the next video and I'll see you there.